All right, it's just about time for us to start. So Barry said that you guys are in Mark right now. He believed it was Mark chapter 8, so that's where we're going to be at tonight. So if you want to go ahead and open up to Mark 8, that's what we're going to talk about. I'm not in this class usually, so I don't know how you guys do. I'm all for talking. I'm all for you guys reading, so I'm going to have you guys read some stuff. This is a pretty hefty passage. It's not huge, but 38 verses. And so we're going to read a little bit of that together. We're going to end up reading the whole thing, so it is going to take up a little bit of our time just reading. But other than that, we're going to stop and make some comments and talk about that. So we're going to start here in Mark chapter 8. And we're going to read, we're going to start 1 through 10. Does anybody want to read it? All right.
Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. Now if I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way, because some of them have come a long distance. So his disciples answered, but where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them? How many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. 7, they replied. So he told the crowd to sit down on the ground. And when he had taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And they did so. They had a few small fish as well, so he gave thanks to them also and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 men were present. And having sent them away, he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the region of Dalmatia.
All right. So, hopefully, if you guys have been in Mark, this sounds pretty familiar, but also a little bit different. So, if you think back just 2 chapters ago to chapter 6, we have the feeding of the 5,000 starting in verse 30 and going through verse 44. And so, we've just had this same scene happen in a different region near the sea here. And that with that story, there were 5,000 being fed. With this story, there's 4,000 being fed, of course, those being the men. But he does the same thing twice, just a couple of months apart. And I find it really interesting that the disciples are sitting here. They've just come with Jesus to this place a couple months after he just did this with 5,000 people. And he commands them to have everyone sit down to eat. And their first question is, well, where are we going to get food? Like they didn't just see him make food. So I've heard some interesting theories about this, and I've heard that some people think that they knew that he could and would make the food, or expand the food, however you want to look at it, but that it wasn't so much where would the food come from, but is he willing to do this for a Gentile people versus a Jewish people? And that is, a very, I don't know if I would say correct, but that is one way to look at it. Was this the point? And if you go and you look at Mark and you look at it specifically, chapter 8, what we're seeing is these disciples are finally starting to realize that the gospel is for all. The gospel is for the Gentiles and for the Jews and for everyone. And so when we see it in that light, it does kind of make sense that they're not necessarily saying, hey, we don't know, how are we going to make all this food? How are we going to get the food? They know Jesus has the power. It's really, are you going to do this for these people? And so we look at it in that light as well. And another thing I wanted to point out in this section is, if you go back to verse 2, Jesus says here, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. So, again, we see this compassion that we saw in chapter 6. I also heard that this is the only time in the Bible where Jesus says in the first person, he blatantly states, I have compassion. All the other instances of Jesus and his compassion are from the third person, someone talking about Jesus and the compassion that they witnessed him have. In this case, Jesus himself says, I am feeling compassion towards these people for their hunger. And one good thought here to think about is that even our earthly needs, such as our food and what we shall wear and where we shall live, all of these things, Jesus knows them before we know them. It's not like they had big herds of people running up to him saying, hey, we're hungry, we're hungry. These people are following Jesus. They've been with him for 3 days and didn't even think, hey, let's bring some food, because they were so invested in what Jesus was teaching that it wasn't about the food. That didn't matter. What mattered was what he had to say. And so he was drawn to compassion, and he did this, and he fed them, much like he did with the 5,000, but this time, very importantly, to a Gentile people who it was unexpected. It was not what the disciples were, looking to happen. They thought, well, definitely not for these people. But as we'll see, that's not the case. He did it for them as well. So let's continue here. Let's go ahead and read verses 11 through, let's stop in verse 21.
From him a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in the spirit and said, why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. And he left them and got into a boat again and went to the other side. Now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they only had one loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, watch out, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves and the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 12. And seven for the 4,000. How many baskets of broken pieces did you take up? And they said, 7. And he said to them, do you not yet understand?
So again, we see the disciples, they're really not understanding life is more about, and being with Jesus is about more than just our earthly possessions and all, what we do here on earth. Specifically, again, here we go with the food. They're hungry. They know they're going to be hungry, and we don't have any food. What are we going to do? You're with the creator of the universe. And so it's easy for us to look back and to see that and to say that and realize, but for them at that moment, they're trying to figure out, where's our next meal going to come from? And Jesus says to them, were you not with me when I fed these 5,000 men? And were you not with me when I fed these 4,000 men? So how much more do you think that I can take care of just the few of you? And so I think that that's very important. And then one thing that I think we should take hold of. So one thing when I'm teaching, just so everybody knows, I use these things, I call them hyperlinks. I got that from the Bible Project and, an actual hyperlink. But I call them hyperlinks, and so I want you to think of this thing as something that we're going to come back to later, and we can just access and be like, oh, yeah, this thing we talked about. So I want to make a little hyperlink here in our brains, and I want to think when it says in verse 18, having eyes do you not see, and having ears do you not hear? So we want to save that, and we want to remember that later. We're going to come back to it. So verse 18, having eyes do you not see, and having ears do you not hear? So, at the end of this, he says, how is it that you still do not understand, even though they've been with him all this time? And so then we go into this next series, and I'll read this one, verses 22 through 26. And this is a really different perspective of Jesus and his miracles and what they were for, and having different instances that he did things differently. So let's read verses 23 through 26. Then he came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes, he put his hands on him and asked him if he saw anything. And he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. And then he put his hands on his eyes again and made him to look up, and he was restored and saw everyone clearly. Then he said to him, sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town nor tell anyone in the town. So, does this strike anyone as different than any of the other miracles that you... Why did it take 2 times? Right. And so, like, I've heard people say, is this just a lapse where Jesus just wasn't really in tune with the Father? And, you know, that's almost laughable. But where are we getting that Jesus didn't heal him correctly on the first time? So I want you to think back to that hyperlink we made. Having eyes, can you not see? And having ears, can you not hear? Is he playing off of this to show that although this man had eyes and he was completely blind, there's a way that you can see, but not clearly see. And he's trying to explain to the disciples with this miracle that although they see what he's doing, although they see his power and his glory, they don't fully understand and they can't clearly see what's going on here. And that'll be super important in this next section. So let's see here. The next section, verses 27. Let's see. We'll stop at verse 30. And so anybody want to read 27 through 30?
With his disciples to the village of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? And they told him, John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets. And he asked them, but who do you say that I am? Peter answered him, you are the Christ. And he strictly charged them not to tell no one about him.
Okay. So I want to pause right there in Mark, and I want to actually flip over to Matthew's account of this, over in Matthew chapter, let's see, it looks like 17, or 16, I'm sorry. Okay, and starting in verse 13, so Matthew 16:13, and we're going to go through verse 20 there.
He asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. He said to them, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter replied, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you're Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Then he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was Christ.
All right, so I wanted to point that out because, like I said, we're focusing on that little hyperlink of having eyes to see, they can't see, and having ears to hear, they don't hear. This is a moment, a real turning point in all of history, but especially Christian history, where we finally see disciples starting to get it, right? They've been with him all this time, and he asks, who do people say that I am? And they list off who other people say, and then he asks, and Peter responds that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And they start to understand that this is more than just when John the Baptist came. This is more than just when one of the prophets came. This is God on earth. And so they're seeing this, and they clearly see that portion of what's going on, but they still have yet to understand that Christ is here for everyone, that he's here for the Gentiles as well. And so this is kind of the turning point where they begin to see and they begin to understand that portion as well. They begin to understand that Jesus has brought salvation for everyone. So now I wanted to read that other portion in Matthew because I like how much detail it goes into on the conversation between Peter and Jesus, and how he goes even more into detail rather than just, yes, I am the Christ, don't tell anyone. Here he actually explains that not only am I the Christ, but I'm going to give you the power on earth, the keys to the kingdom, and I'm going to have anything that you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And so they start to gain responsibility with this understanding of where they're going to go next, where they're going to go after Jesus' death and resurrection. So then, the next question of what's going to happen next. So he tells him he's going to give him the keys to the kingdom, but why are you giving the keys away? Well, now he goes and he predicts his death and his resurrection. So in verses 31 and following, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed after 3 days and rise again. And he spoke this word openly. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. And when he had turned around and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but of the things of men." Any thoughts about what that could mean? What is Jesus trying to say here?
It was going to happen if I say that it's going to happen.
Right. I believe that the purpose of Christ coming was not for him to live on earth. It was for him to die for our sins. And as Peter is starting to realize that this is God on earth and this is the King that we've been looking forward to, the Messiah that we've been looking forward to for these thousands of years, this is him. He's finally here. And then the first thing he tells you when you realize this is, oh, by the way, I'm fixing to die. And I mean, what would you even, how would you go about processing that? You know, we've been looking for a Davidic king to come by, and finally somebody's going to come. He's going to defeat the Romans, and we've got this wrong idea of what Jesus is going to look like already. We think he's going to be this big, strong man king who runs around with a sword like Goliath's sword and chops off the head of all the evil kings. But what we get is a carpenter's son who's humble and washes people's feet. He already doesn't look like the king that they were looking for. And finally, Peter starts to realize, no, wait, there's more to this. This is a spiritual king of a spiritual kingdom. And he's starting to realize that. And then all of a sudden, nope, here he is. He's going to die. And Peter's like, no, absolutely not. That wouldn't happen to you because you're God on earth. And so then, of course, you know, we get Jesus' response to that. Get behind me, Satan, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but of the things of men. He wants his king there. He wants to be in the presence of his king. And if Jesus is dead, he feels like he won't be in that presence anymore. What's going to happen to the kingdom? Well, what's going to happen is you're going to take it forward. You and the other apostles are going to take it forward after I come back to you in the resurrection. And so I think that it's important to see that, you know, Peter is finally beginning to understand, but even then, he's not clearly seeing the will of God. And how many times do we do that? You know, how many times do we think that we know that God is pushing us one way or pushing us another way, or something happened that was bad or good, and we attribute it to God, and we say that, okay, God's will be done, and then something else happens, and we're like, well, I wouldn't have done it that way. You know? Our minds are on the thoughts of man and not on the thoughts of God. And so we need to be sure to shy away from that. So we're running pretty quickly here, but over in verse 34 and following, We're going to go there and talk about the next section. All right, so it says, when he had called the people to himself with his disciples, also he said to them, whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. So let's stop right there for just a second. Has anyone ever thought about the fact that in verses 30, or in just verse 34, Jesus says, whoever takes up the cross and follows me, not only does he predict that he's going to die, he predicts how he's going to die by the hands of the Romans on the cross. And that wasn't just an average everyday way to die. That was a very specific punishment for a very specific breaking of the law. And yet he knows this is how I'm going to die. And not only that, if you want to follow me, this is how you must do it. You must pick up that cross and follow me. Another portion of that we should talk about is it's not mild inconvenience to pick up the cross and follow Jesus. It's not going a little bit out of your way to pick up your cross and follow Jesus. It is following Jesus with everything that you are, everything that you have. I'm willing to give it all away, even to the point of death, to follow Jesus. And not only that, I will work to my death by carrying a cross to a mountain for them to slaughter me. That's the kind of faith that we have to follow Jesus. And he's telling this to his disciples and to his apostles because they're finally beginning to see that this is where this is headed for him to die on the cross, and it's not going to be a pretty and easy road. This is a serious thing, and a serious thing that we're getting into. And so to pick up your cross and follow Jesus, I want us to remember that as a hard, difficult decision. It's not just an easy, okay, yeah, I'll leave and go with you. And one thing that I see a lot of, and we all do in the Gospels here, is when he asks someone to follow him, it's a drop everything and come. Every time. He never says, okay, well, go settle your affairs and then come. It's not, oh, well, you had to bury your dead. He says, let the bed bury the dead. He says, oh, well, I have a piece of land that I have purchased. Who cares? Drop it and let's go. They drop the nets. Every single time it is a drop everything, give everything up, and follow me. So it's not mild inconvenience. It's not something that we lightly do to follow him. So we're going to continue here in verse 35. It says, for whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's sake will save it. So here again we see that this is to the point of death that I am to be willing to follow him as a disciple. We have to go even to the point of death and beyond to be able to follow him correctly. Verse 36, for what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him the Son of Man also will be ashamed when he comes in glory of the Father with his holy angels. So, any thoughts on this section here? What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul?
You can get everything you want in your life any way you want to, have everything in the world, but if you don't believe and if you don't have faith, then it's over for you.
Right. It reminds me of the man who built bigger and bigger and bigger barns, and then after he built his biggest barn that night, his soul was required of him, and they asked, whose is this stuff now? What does it matter now that you've kept all of this to yourself? You've not shared any of your generosity to anyone else, or your wealth to anyone else with generosity, but you've hoarded it all up and all these material things, and that's something that we really need to grasp as Christians in 2023. This is thousands of years ago, and it's hard to put ourselves in the context. But one of the things that we need to understand is that as we go through our lives, Gary was talking one night about how rich we are as people. Even the poorest of us are very, very, very rich at a worldwide scale, and how much we actually have to contribute. And so when you think about that, and you think about this man building the bigger and bigger barns, the more we hoard up for ourselves, that does nothing. It doesn't go anywhere. And, take care of your families, take care of your spouses and your children. And beyond that, what is it doing for anyone? How much better would it be for us as Christians to help others? And so I think that's something we would do, and I think that's something that we do at this congregation. I think we're really good about that. I think that we're a very generous congregation, and I think that this kind of gives you an idea of what taking up that cross means. When we are mildly inconvenienced by going and doing a good work, that's not really enough. We need to give everything that we can and do everything that we can, and that's more than financial, that's more physical. Give all that you have to give to God, give it to God, and that's what we're supposed to do. Any more comments, questions? Okay, we'll go ahead and start into chapter 9 here. All right, and he said to them, "Assuredly I say to you that there are some standing here who will not taste death till they see the kingdom of God present with power." So starting just in that one little section there, that one verse, what does that mean? So I know many people get hung up on this and try to find out, are these people walking around alive today? Has the kingdom not come? Has it come? When did it come? All of these things, and there's arguments for a lot of that to be said. Obviously, they're not walking around here alive. We've got that one pretty well put to bed. But I want to notice that the very next thing that happens is the transfiguration of Jesus. And so let's go ahead and read that. If somebody wants to read verses 2 through, looks like 13. So 9, 2 through 13.
Peter, James, and John, and led them up to a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became radiant, intensely white, as no one on the earth could glimpse them. And there appeared to them Elijah and Moses, and they were talking to Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, is it good that we are here? Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." For he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. And a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." And suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them but Jesus only. And as they were coming down from the mountain, he charged them to tell no one what they had seen, until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So the captain gathered to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead might mean. And they asked him, "Why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come?" And he said to them, "Elijah does come first to restore all things. And how it is written of the Son of Man that he can suffer many things and be treated with contempt. But I tell you that Elijah has come, and they do him whatsoever they please, as is written of him."
All right, so I think that it's a really easy conversation to have when we think about what the kingdom of God coming with power means, when the very next thing that happens is Jesus goes up on a mountain and shines white, and he's sitting there with the, I don't know how else to put it other than the greats are up there with him, and everyone, they see this, and they know who these people are. They know what's happening, and they see God's power being shown in Christ. Now, I personally think that this is not the the fullness of the kingdom that they're going to see. I believe that happens at the resurrection. I believe that happens when they see the completion of Christ's life here and him moving on to his seat next to God, the Father. So let's keep moving here through chapter 9, verses 14 through 29. And when he came to the disciples, he saw a great multitude around them, and scribes disputing with them. Immediately, when they saw him, all the people were greatly amazed, and running to him, greeted him. And he asked the scribes, "What were you discussing with them?" Then one of the crowd answered and said, "Teacher, I brought you my son who has a mute spirit. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. So I spoke to your disciples, and that they should cast him out, but they could not." He answered him and said, "O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me." Then they brought him to him, and when he had saw him, the spirit convulsed him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. So he asked his father, "How long has it been happening to him?" He said, "From childhood. And often he has thrown him both into fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, you have compassion on us to help us." And Jesus said to him, "If you can believe, all things are possible with him who believes." And immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief." When Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "Deaf and dumb spirit, I command you, come out of him and enter him no more." Then the spirit cried out and convulsed him with a greatly, and came out of him, and became as one. He became as one dead. So many said that he is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had come up into the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" So he said to them, "This kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting." So I've always thought that was weird, and I don't really have an answer for what that means. As the disciples, they've been given the power to cast out demons, and they've been casting out demons, but they go to cast this one out, and they can't figure it out. And he just simply states that, this kind can only come out by nothing but prayer and fasting. And so it makes you think, what all different kinds are there? Is this like a tier list, and this one's worse than that one, and you just got to know the right recipe? And so any thoughts on this section of this boy being healed of that demon?
I think it had nothing to do with their faith. They still wasn't 100%. Because as soon as he died, they all left.
Yep. I think that's true, and I think that
You get to the Acts, Romans, whatever, they start healing other people, then it was simple for them after that.
right. And is that not the coming of the kingdom? Is that not at the point that they, the Holy Spirit has come to them and given them this power like no other, that they now have these abilities and these things that they can do where it becomes easy for them. And so, of course, we know that happens in the upper room there. All right, so let's go here to this next section where Jesus predicts his death again. And they departed from there, and passing through Galilee, he did not want anyone to know it, for he taught his disciples and said to them, "The Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And after he's killed, he will rise on the third day." But they did not understand the saying, and were afraid to ask him. And so, once again, here we are. We've gone through this same storyline several times, but they see, they understand, but they don't fully understand. They don't clearly get what is happening here, and they're confused, but yet they didn't want to ask him because they're scared of being rebuked like Peter was for saying no, that wouldn't happen. And so then they move on And it says, Then he came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, What was it that you disputed among yourselves on the road? But they kept silent, for on the road they had disputed among themselves for who would be the greatest. And he sat down and called the 12 to him, and they said to them, If anyone desires to be first, he shall be last of all, and servant of all. Then he took a little child and set it in the midst of them. And when he had taken him out in his arms, he said to them, Whoever receives one of these little children in my name receives me, and whoever receives me not, but him who sent me. So he's trying to explain to them again that it's not the way that they're seeing things. It's not this physical world that they're striving to live in. They're arguing among themselves, okay, well, when we get to heaven, can I be at your right hand? Can I be the next guy in line? I want to be in a seat of power. And which one of us is going to be the greatest? And he tries to explain to them that it doesn't make you the greatest because you did something great here on earth. But what it does make you the greatest is to be lowly and to be humble and to not strive to get that highest seat, to not strive to be the greatest. What you strive to be is a servant, much like Jesus was. And so, let's continue here. If someone wants to read verses 38 through 41.
Him to stop because he was not one of us. Do not stop him, Jesus said. No one who does a miracle in my name can in the next moment say anything bad about me. For whoever is not against us is for us. I tell you the truth. Anyone who gives you a cup of water in my name because you belong to Christ will certainly not lose his reward.
All right, any thoughts on this section here? I've always tried to figure out and always... Right. Without being a disciple. Yep, that's what I think of as well. One thing to notice throughout the Gospels is many of the times, not every time, but many of the times that someone is healed in a specific situation. So we know Jesus healed thousands and probably more than thousands of people in his lifetime and in his ministry. But when they're specifically mentioned, and we have the story here like that of the boy being healed in the chapter before, it's not a coming to Jesus, asking him, and then he does it. He does it, like you said, based on their faith. And it's God doing these things, which we know Jesus is God, but God the Father is conducting this healing through Jesus and through the faith of the people asking for it. And so that has a lot for our prayer life and our faith. How much faith do we have? And if we were in the same child to be healed or sick parent to be, and if they have faith, like a mustard seed, they can tell a mountain to move and it'll go jump into the sea. And so I think it has a lot to say about that. And this specific man, yet again, the disciples with him don't understand. They don't see clear doing a work, and he's doing it correctly. And like you said, he must have had great